everyone, Republic Jim here. I'm back in the barn, just working on warm-up, ramping up sets of trap bar deadlift. But that's actually not the topic that I wanted to discuss today. As you can probably tell from the title of the video, I wanted to revisit an old topic of earthquakes, which I really haven't talked about much lately. But I've had some new thoughts, kind of reconsidered some things about one that I did a long time ago. And if you're interested in that, you can check out my playlist on earthquakes. But anyway, the reason I'm out here doing this is because since the last video I uploaded, I got sick for about a week, had a couple of growths removed from my back. Then my wife got sick for over a week. And so I'm just way behind on everything. Just don't really have the time or energy to really put into making just dedicated videos. So I figured I would multitask and just talk in between sets. So I'm gonna knock this one out and then I'll come back and kind of get into the topic. Okay, so as the title says, I want to talk a little bit about the east side effects of the big one in the Cascadia subduction zone. And for anyone that's not familiar with that, that's the big edge of the plate out in the Pacific Ocean off the coast of Washington and Oregon that they keep talking about. The big one will hit at some point. And that could conceivably be like the magnitude of upper 8s to even up to like a mid 9 or something, depending on just how much of it cut loose at one time and how severe it was. But, you know, I'd mentioned in a video in the past that we would definitely feel it here. It'd be moderate shaking, and we would know that the big one had hit because of the length of the shaking. Not because of the magnitude, because, you know, we're way over on the other side of the state, so we would have much less severe shaking. But with earthquakes, the bigger the quake, basically the longer the shaking continues. So if we were to have a local, like 3 point something or even a 4, it would last for seconds. You know, it could go on for what seems like a long time, you know, but it'd most likely still be less than a minute. But if an 8 or a 9 hit over off the coast of Washington, we might feel something equivalent to a 3 or a 4 here as far as intensity, but the shaking would last for several minutes. So we would recognize that that one had hit by that length of time, but you know, it wouldn't have a huge effect on this side of the state like it would over there. But I have, in light of recent events, kind of rethought things a little bit. So I'll get back to that in just a moment. So what I have been kind of rethinking is a statement that I made, and I don't remember exactly how I phrased it, but it was something to the effect that the intensity wouldn't be very high here, and so we wouldn't have any damage. And so what has made me rethink that is the somewhat recent 7.7 earthquake in Myanmar. And for those who didn't really pay attention to the news, that caused a lot of devastation in Myanmar, which you would expect because it was, the epicenter was right there. But the real eye-opener happened in Bangkok, Thailand, where unfortunately a tall building that was under construction collapsed and killed a bunch of the construction workers. And then there was also some fairly violent shaking that ripped loose a sky bridge in between buildings and caused a lot of rooftop swimming pools to splash all over the place, and it was pretty impressive. And especially when you take into account that Bangkok is somewhere like around 500 to 600 miles away from the epicenter. And, you know, depending on where the Cascadia subduction zone ruptures, whenever it actually does, you know, that could be more like in the range of, I don't remember exactly, but probably like 300 to 400 miles, so much closer. And, you know, we're talking about a higher magnitude quake as well. Now, what does offset that is that our geology and location and relative to where that would happen is a lot different than what happened with Myanmar and Bangkok. Because in that situation, Myanmar was up to the north, and then Bangkok was down here, kind of parallel to the fault line that ran through the valley there. Now granted, Bangkok is a fair ways east of that fault line, but as I said, it's kind of parallel. The force runs right through that fault, and it looks like it's pretty much a valley. I have no idea what the actual geology is like as far as bedrock and everything else, but it's a little different to our situation here, where the subduction zone is out offshore in the west, you know, and then you have this line running parallel to that subduction zone that's the Cascades, you know, big mountain range, and then we're perpendicular to that on the other side. So, and granted, you know, it's pretty obvious with that mountain range, we have a lot of rock in between us. So, I kind of suspect, just based on that and from the projections that experts have made on shake maps and such, that not nearly as much force would transfer across the state like that in a perpendicular. More of it would run north and south and hit along the coast and such, and wouldn't necessarily radiate as far to the east. But there is a large caveat there, which I'll get to in just a moment. Hey. All right, that was my first working set, and that was definitely working. Whew. Okay, so here's the thing that made me reconsider after the Myanmar quake, because like I said, that was a 7.7, which is several magnitudes smaller than what Cascadia rupture would be. So even with the other variables, keep in mind that the Cascadia one would last longer. And what I noticed is, just with the videos and such that I could see, looked to me like that building and some of the other damage that occurred in Bangkok didn't necessarily happen right away. Everything started shaking and moving a little bit and stuff. But what caused the real damage was the cumulative shaking from just going on for a few minutes. And, they can say what they want about the faulty construction and everything. I'm sure if they built that tower correctly, it would not have collapsed. But the fact remains, if it had been a smaller local quake, it would not have caused as much damage, just because the shaking would have ended much more quickly, even if it was the same magnitude locally. So that's the main point that I want to get at there, is that that sustained shaking for several minutes is what really causes things to start shaking loose and breaking apart and stuff. So with that in mind, I'm thinking, regarding my original statement about the east side of the state, that possibly I was a little bit off on my assessment there, because assuming that we had moderate shaking here, like, in the 3 to 4 range, I've experienced one quake that was in that, like in the 4 range many years ago when I lived in Portland. And it's a little unnerving, but everything just kind of vibrates and feels like there's a train going by really close or something. So for just a localized quake of that magnitude, not a big deal. Most buildings are going to be fine. Right near the epicenter of that particular quake, it did make some bricks fall off of facades and things, caused some damage. But now I'm thinking, based on the Myanmar evidence, that as it goes on and on like that, it's going to take more of a toll than I was thinking. So, like, I would think that a lot of wood frame buildings would still be okay, because they tend to flex and kind of absorb the shock. Might crack sheetrock and knock stuff off shelves and such. But I wouldn't expect a lot of structural damage on wood buildings. But for buildings that are made of unreinforced brick or other masonry, or possibly even concrete if it's old and not really well reinforced, there's the potential for a lot of old historic buildings in these rural areas to just gradually start disintegrating as the shaking continues minute after minute. Okay, hold that thought again. Pardon me. 3 reps that time. I'm not doing 5. Just not quite up to it yet. My strength and endurance is coming back, but I'm still feeling a little bit weak after that long bout of being sick. So, yeah, I'll just do 3 for the last couple sets. So, anyway, as I was saying, for, you know, brick buildings, masonry and different ones, they might be okay for the first couple of minutes, but I could picture that as that shaking continues at that same moderate intensity, the mortar could start turning to powder, especially old, you know, some of these 100-year-old plus buildings. Mortar could just disintegrate and bricks start falling off, and you know, concrete busting out around rebar and such. So there is definitely the potential there for more damage on the east side than what I had originally been considering. So anyway, that's just pretty much all that I wanted to go over there. Just keep in mind that not only will we be able to know on this side of the state, you know, if, I should say, not, I mean, they keep saying when it happens, but that may or may not even be in our lifetime. We don't know. I haven't really seen anything to make me think that it's imminent, even though as far as the time frame, they say that we're due. But basically, if it happens on this side of the state, we will definitely know just when we feel that extended shaking at moderate level. But just be aware that it could actually cause a fair amount more damage than what I was thinking, you know, said in my old video. And, you know, depending on how the force transfers through the Cascades and over to this side, it's really hard to tell. You know, even the experts with all their modeling and such computerized stuff, they come up with a basic idea, but they don't know for sure until it actually happens. But even if it is in that moderate range that they're talking about, just know, like, if you're in an old brick or stone building or something, or if you're nearby one, once that shaking continues for more than, you know, 10 or 20 seconds, so it's definitely a good idea to get away from that. I mean, you probably should anyway, even if it's a localized quake, but definitely if the shaking continues, just know that things are going to start falling and such, so get out in the open and stay away from anything like that. So yeah, that's my rethinking of my original thesis there on the east side effects of Cascadia subduction zone. Hope that's been interesting or thought-provoking or whatever. This has been Republic Jim. I'll talk to you later.